Thank you for finding this YouTube channel. We are in the midst of a midweek series on Revelation. This is a series of clips that are accompanying a series of sermons that are being preached for the weekends of April 19th, 26th, and the first weekend in May. Those 3 Sundays are devoted to Revelation chapter 1. So as you can see, we are taking our own good time to find our way through the book of Revelation. This clip is 1C, and in this clip, again, because it is for the Bible study and it is a different approach from what I do with the preaching, I want here to simply clarify what are my frameworks in terms of end times thinking. The theological word is eschatology. I know that some of you will not be satisfied until you have heard me describe myself in those terms by which you explore and argue different end time models or frameworks for eschatology. So let me say first that I respect several theologians who take the outlook of premillennial and pre-tribulation dispensationalism. I am not one of them, but I have learned from some of them. David Jeremiah being one whom I especially respect. I also mentioned in another clip Millard Erickson and Erwin Lutzer. I disagree with the overall premise that it rightly divides the word to do so in the system that John Nelson Darby devised around 1830, and that C.I. Scofield systematized in his notes on the King James in 1919. I especially disagree with those who then want to set special safeguards around what they consider the divine inspiration and usefulness of the King James Version based on their need for certain English usages that have become essential to their end time systems, at least in some of those views. So I disagree with that, certainly, and the King James is not the primary teaching text for either the congregation that I serve or for this Bible study. In fact, what I hold up from time to time is the Pastor's Bible edition, which is a large print, actually, and it's a New International Version. In some ways, it is easier to describe what I am not than what I am. At times, I will sound like a pessimistic amillennialist. However, I distance myself from those traditional Protestant positions, some of them entrenched in the confessions of the Reformation, such as the Augsburg Confession, that depict the Catholic papacy as an end times antagonist against Christ. This was true of Johann Albrecht Bengel, my pietist forerunner in the Lutheran faith in Germany in the 18th century. Bengel is the one that I mentioned in clip 1A, who thought that the world was ending in 1836. As a pastor in the Evangelical Covenant Church, I inherit a tradition that takes no confessional stance regarding end times doctrine. In our family of faith, we cover the gamut. There is evidence that around the time of our founding in 1885, many went into the mission field stirred by the urgency of dispensationalism. But other covenant missionaries shared in the post-millennial optimism that was characteristic of Protestantism in the 19th century. Missionaries in both approaches, sadly, took for granted racial assumptions and cultural chauvinisms that accompanied much of the missionary endeavor in those days and on into the middle of the 20th century. The Evangelical Covenant has since sought to repudiate the chauvinisms and to view our global partners as equals rather than as dependents. What was true of much of the rest of Western society was true in the covenant, to the degree that postmillennialism and an optimistic view of the world's gradual conversion to Christ was blasted to pieces by the artillery of World War I. The Evangelical Covenant is a post-confessional movement that split out of the Lutheran branch of the Reformation that took place after my pietist forerunner Bengel, his lifetime. Johann Albrecht Bengel was himself a ordained Lutheran. Culturally, many of the early covenant congregations had started as Lutheran churches, and as such they carried amillennial Lutheran assumptions about the end times. These were coupled with the view that the second coming could occur at any time. However, neither that position nor any other has ever been required of me, either in my graduation from Evangelical Covenant schools, and I hold my divinity degree from North Park Theological Seminary in Chicago, or in my ordination as a pastor in the Evangelical Covenant Church. I have not had to sign my name to any dogma regarding the shape and timelines and durations of the end times. That said, there are three authors of particular importance to me from within the Evangelical Covenant milieu. Their books do not sell as well as late great Planet Earth or the Left Behind series by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins, published in the 1990s, nor have they become household names among so-called prophecy experts. The reason is that these pastoral scholars work out of sound exegetical principles with no desire to tickle ears. First is Nils Lund, who lived and taught before I was born. He wrote a groundbreaking commentary on Revelation, which identified Hebrew literary forms in the structure of the book. In that way, Lund tied the author to Jewish roots in the way that the book itself was constructed. Now, Lund did this even before the discoveries at Qumran of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that had occurred in the wake of the Holocaust in World War II. And those things together made it quite vogue to appreciate the Jewishness of the followers of Jesus and of the apostles of the New Testament period. But Lund did this work before that. He was a professor of New Testament at North Park Theological Seminary. And then in 1980, my own father, Everett Wilson, published with the Covenant Church an answer to Hal Lindsey's late great Planet Earth called Jesus and the End Time. This called into question many of Lindsey's premises based mostly on Everett Wilson's exegesis of the Olivet Discourse in the Gospels. Then, just a few years ago, another North Park scholar, J. Phelan, wrote Essential Eschatology, treating Revelation from the standpoint of inaugurated eschatology. With this updated amillennial viewpoint, Phelan argues that the focus of Revelation is on the ethical demands of the church as it confronts the claims and temptations of empire. The literalness of the 1,000-year reign as such is a sidelight. It is a minor issue at the denouement of the drama. While I may be making occasional references to these sources, these are not my chief sources for this study and for this preaching series. Aside from the Bible, and that would include the 5th edition Greek New Testament from the United Bible Society, My sources for this study, in ascending order of priority, are N.T. Wright, who wrote Revelation for Everyone, part of the series of the Bible for Everyone. And N.T. Wright is an Anglican bishop and a renowned New Testament scholar. Then comes Johann Albrecht Bengel, that 18th century German pietist that I keep bringing up. The reason that I continue to make a resource of Bengel is twofold. First of all, his word studies in the New Testament, of which this is a part, this is volume 2, these set the standard for hundreds of years. And the reason is that he remained anchored in the disciplines of exegesis. So that is what this volume is. This is the word study, which includes the word study in Revelation. This is not his commentary on Revelation. And that is the second reason why I am referring to Bengel. If even he could slip away from those same exegetical disciplines into spurious lines of speculation when it came to the book of Revelation, then that reminds me, as an heir of his pietism, to be humble about my conclusions. You can see the influence he has had. He did his writing in Latin and in German. This edition was published over 150 years later in English. And so several editions of his word studies in the New Testament were made available over the generations. But my chief resource, and one that I truly appreciate, is Craig Keener, professor at Eastern Seminary and author of the NIV application commentary in Revelation. He also co-wrote a shorter volume on themes in Revelation called Not Afraid of the Antichrist. And his co-author is Michael Brown, a Messianic Jewish follower of Jesus. The subtitle is Why We Don't Believe in a Pre-Tribulation Rapture. Well, if they're not going to be raptured, shouldn't they be afraid of the Antichrist? And that is precisely the point. No, we should not. We know that in Jesus Christ, we are more than conquerors. So if I were to be contacted by someone who's been viewing these clips, wanted to follow up, wanted to see in more depth how it is that a careful exegetical study of biblical passages would serve to unravel the dispensationalist model of John Nelson Darby, this is an excellent resource to do that, and this is what I would recommend. Well, as you can see, I'm not consulting a Schofield Bible. My evangelical theological background and orientation is pietist. It is not fundamentalist. That said, in an earlier in-depth study almost 15 years ago, I arrived at the conclusion of what is called historical premillennialism, what many scholars believed was held by many of the ancient authors of the church, those that lived in the first 4 centuries after Jesus. I believe that there is promise of an embodied 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ centered in Jerusalem before the appearance of the new heavens and the new earth. I also believe that while I am not wrong about the substance of the Christian hope in the resurrection and eternal life, I might be wrong about the hows and wheres of these other pieces of the end times, such as the millennium. And if I ever get too confident, I'll just remember my friend Bengal. A stronger conviction that I hold is that no Christian or subculture of Christians is exempt or immune from persecution, small or great. Too much of church history over too much time shows us that the world hates the witness of the gospel to the grace of God. So just as there is no escape room puzzle, so there is no room to escape, as it were. The rapture that precedes persecution is to me a spurious doctrine, and I agree with Keener and Brown on that. And in fact, it can even be dangerous for two reasons that I'll share here. First, there is the risk that Christians will take that promise of a rapture to also mean that they can excuse themselves from the risks of testimony in the meantime. And second, Christians expecting to be rescued from persecution may lose their faith and deny God when severe persecutions come in the forms of threats to property, to life, and to the lives of loved ones. I do not truck with the notion among American evangelicals or their health and wealth charismatic counterparts that we get to live high on the hog and then escape the sufferings of the world's oppression in the so-called Great Tribulation by being raptured away. Such a notion cuts against the grain of the Bible's witness and the call of Jesus. To follow Christ is to take up the cross he hands you and persevere with it. And that is what Revelation is about. So with that, some will most comfortably fit me in the box of post-tribulation premillennialism, and that is the box which Craig Keener applies to himself, less so here and more so here. That is probably as accurate a label as I am able to wear, unless I do slip into some of that bothersome amillennial jargon. But if you must press the point on a literal 1,000 years, on the pre-resurrected earth, yes, I do arrive at that as well, based on Revelation chapter 20 and how it fits in the Bible's outlook on things, especially God's promises to Israel. But of all the doctrines of Christian hope, the 1,000-year reign, to me anyway, is the least important, and the one that I am most likely to be persuaded to change my mind about. And in any case, I hope you share with me the conviction that the substance of the Christian hope is not about what happens for only 1,000 years. It is about what happens for all eternity.